Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm doing a series of videos in terms of government policy. The particular reason why I'm doing this one on federal minimum wage is it's a way to kind of discredit the NDP in terms of their lack of credibility with their facts and figures in terms of their analysis, and to kind of pinpoint exactly where they pull information from when they kind of make statements on government policy. So this particular presentation is focused on federal minimum wage, which for whatever reason for the past 30 days Thomas Mulcair's kind of just went like this and ignored this whole policy statement. And there's a reason why, as I go into the specific details, why is he's ignoring this, because it actually shows that his facts and figures are actually wrong. And it also shows that this guy flies by the seat of his pants, and he really doesn't deal with factual information. He deals with emotion, and when he's got facts that he can't defend, and he runs from them. So let's talk about really what he basically said. He basically used the Canadian Labour Congress, and they're tied back to the NDP roots, so that's part of the reason why he used this. The CLC had basically came up with a number that said 100,000 people were impacted by the federal minimum wage. And really what that means is federal regulated businesses, there's 100,000 people making minimum wage. But once you go into the details, that is so far from the truth that actually the impact is less than 1,000 workers. So you can see why Mulcair has kind of walked away from this policy, because in essence it's nowhere near the statements he was making. There's nowhere near the impact. So if it's got a low impact, what do you think Mulcair is going to do? He's going to avoid it. So that's why I put basically the links from different sources. I pulled from the basically Global, and I also pulled from CTV. Both basically discredited the comment on minimum wage. Now let's talk about that. Basically, minimum wage is set by the provincial level. Okay, and typically most people that make minimum wage are in the service sector or retail side, right? In a lot of cases it's students, right? So there's a whole this thing about if you up minimum wage, basically you up how people get by, but that's not necessarily a true statement, because the fact is business is basically will pass cost on. So even if you up minimum wage, it actually is going to increase costs from rent to food and all that. So it doesn't really do that, solve the issue. If you want to fix minimum wage, then you fix people on minimum wage and push them to skilled trades or see how they can get off minimum wage. But that's not the clear message that you're going to get from the NDP, because they're supposed to be the socialist group that supports basically poverty levels being reduced, and they blame it all on federal government in terms of minimum wage. Basically, that's why I basically posted this one here in terms of the NDP policy. They wanted to establish a federal minimum wage, but they were never clear that it was only federal regulated businesses like ports, transportation, airports. So if I go to the next slide, it kind of gives you an example of uranium mining. Now, First Nation activities. This can be them operating like stores and stuff like that. So yes, then maybe that would impact a little bit in terms of minimum wage there. But the rest of the stuff where you see like cable system, broadcasting, marine shipping, railroads and all that, most of the jobs there, a good chunk of them, probably 99.9% of those jobs, do not pay minimum wage. And I'll show you an example in the next slide what I mean. Look at this in terms of the wages. Okay, if you look at the average wage for people in terms of what they're making, the only sector that really you see the most minimum wage is in the retail and in the service sector, which is hospitality side. And I did an analysis on this and I highlighted it. And you can even see clearly from this thing based on Stats Canada report that the ones that making less than $15 an hour are within those particular areas. And in most cases, those aren't federal regulated. And I already did kind of, this is a good example I like to use because it shows you would only benefit 500 people. So 99.99% of the jobs would not be impacted by a $15 change. This is a good example why when Mulcair makes statements that he's less than factual. When you're less than factual and make statements, then as voters in the electorate, you should kind of be questioned whenever this guy speaks, because most cases he's not talking with accurate facts. When he is talking is emotion. I'm the champion of something. But in essence, if you back him in a corner, a lot of cases you'll get the angry Tom out of it because he can't defend his action, and he feels that basically by getting mad at people he'll kind of show a different image. He doesn't like to be confronted with things he can't defend. So that's why typically he deals with platitudes, he deals with blaming Harper. He will never discuss details of his policies for that reason. This one just gives you an example in Alberta. I won't spend a lot of time on this particular slide. It just shows you the impact, the new wages if you went up to this. That would take you up to like $31,200. And I'd be hesitant to say that because usually with businesses, even if they have a hike in cost, they may not necessarily give you full-time hours. They may scale hours back, or they may look at how they operate. So the overall benefit of minimum wage hikes typically never has been proven that it actually reduces poverty rates. Now, and as I said before, that the key aspect with anything with minimum wage is having a two-tiered approach with policy. One is, okay, who's on minimum wage? How can we get them off? The other thing is basically poverty is going to be driven by a lot of different factors. Like housing costs and rent controls come into play, food costs come into play. So if you really want to look at something, go look at the tax policies that are being proposed by the NDP and Liberal Party. Both of them are proposing hikes to CPP enhancement, which is a payroll tax which reduces your after-tax income. They're also proposing cap and trade, which can add up to 8 to 10% more cost to goods. That's going to impact people. So where they're saying they're pro or against anti-poverty, are they really anti-poverty when they're bringing in policies that are actually going to change the consumer pricing? And consumer pricing affect the ability of people's cost of living. That affects the people to get by. You'll never hear those statements because, again, when you deal with the NDP and Liberal Party, they tend to deal with basically information at a high level, and they don't go to all angles. What you need to ask yourself, what party has added and helped the middle to low income Canadians over the past decade? And that's Stephen Harper. You can go out and Google the tax cuts that Mr. Harper brought in, either the cut to GST or the personal tax cuts that he's brought in. And you can go Google that through the internet, and if you go PBO cuts, you will see the exact article where it talks about the $30 billion tax cuts that benefit the low to middle income Canadians.